Thank you and welcome everyone. Thank you for waiting as we had a few people gather in. To start off today, I'd like to take a moment of your time and share this quick video introducing ENVPMS.
Asuyuti. We. Ganche. Sagoli. Uki. Koete Hopa.
Colamalsi, Dante,
Ani. Tanse. Sagon.
Stano, Buju,
It's really high.
Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Nadine. I am from the Stories team, and we are working with Greg and his team from ENVPMS to bring you this amazing webinar series. Now, at Stories, we believe that storytelling is the essence of Indigenous communities and culture, and we look forward to hearing such incredible stories today. Joining us, we've got Melanie and Greg. Both will be taking us through this wonderful session, talking about navigating the importance of water and wastewater for Indigenous communities. Now, before I hand over to Greg and get started for today, I would just like a moment of your time to have your phones up, as I would like to see where we have wonderful people joining us from.
Asuyuti.
Sorry. Okay, so if you can please scan the barcode and let us know where you're joining us from today. I will keep it up for a bit and then we can take a look at the amazing communities we have joining us. All right, are we getting some results? All right, Six Nations. Black Lake, Treaty 3. Amazing. I'm just going to keep it up a bit more. Let's see where we have everyone joining us from today. Big Grassy. And if anyone missed the barcode, my colleague Mariam has also shared the Menti link. We'd love to see all of these names popping up. All right, perfect. Thank you, everyone. I am going to now hand over to Greg to get us started today with our session as we continue with our speaker for today, Melanie from Ontario First Nations. Please, Greg, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Nadine. Greg Philiban here. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Environmental Project Management and Sustainability Solutions. As mentioned in the video, our vision is to empower Indigenous communities to protect the land and secure a sustainable future. Our mission is to deliver culturally sensitive and grounded project management solutions that strengthen Indigenous communities. Over the past 15 years, We've delivered training to participants from over 170 communities from across Canada, impacting the lives of over 480,000 community members. Our goal for this is to be a space for you to connect with leaders and experts who are transforming project management across communities throughout Canada. All right, so let's get right to it. So first, I'd like to welcome Melanie Debassige, Executive Director of the Ontario First Nations Technical Services Corporation. Welcome. It's a true honor to have you here today, Melanie. Melanie is from, now correct me if I say this incorrectly, Melanie Miching? Did I say that right? Michiging. All right. First Nation on Manitoulin Island, and currently serves as Executive Director of the Ontario First Nations Technical Services Corporation. She sits on several boards, including the Canada Energy Regulator, Ontario Clean Water Agency, Reconciliation Canada, Legal Aid Ontario. That's a pile of boards. Holy smoke, busy girl. Welcome, Melanie. We're grateful we've got you here today. So to start things off, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. One is can you share a bit about your personal journey and you know what led you to your current role with the Ontario First Nations Technical Services Corp?
So I guess I would go back to looking at where I wanted to be and completing high school just maybe a year later, because I did have my first son when I was 18. I thought I wanted to, you know, pursue a degree in business and go into economic development, because I seen how, you know, we could really help, you know, nation to nation building Indigenous prosperity through, you know, economic development. So that was my first embarkment, probably for the first 20 years of my career. And, following that journey and having some great mentors and, you know, having mentors from not only my professional career, but also my education, it led me to working for a small bit with some politicians. And then I got a call, and at the current time I was working on a like a housing association with a group of people from British Columbia. And then I got a call to see if I was interested in working in Ontario with tech services. So I immediately, it sparked some excitement, because after working in economic development for 20 years, and that also included tourism, I realized you cannot reach those goals without having the foundation. And the foundation is infrastructure, it's water, it's buildings. And you cannot do that and all those great things you want to do without that foundational expertise. So coming back to Ontario from British Columbia, I came and I joined this corporation, and we currently at the time had an office in downtown Toronto. So I lived in downtown Toronto, and it was a little bit of a change, but walking in the doors at 111 Peter Street, I realized, I was up for quite the challenge, and I was willing to take it on, and I put in a lot of hard, long hours. The organization needed some modernization, same with the governance. And I put together automatically like a 90, 100, 120 day, and then, a 2 to 3 year plan of how those goals would be achieved, to get the corporation on track, because I seen the need for this type of service here in Ontario, and how do we elevate that from what was started by some great leadership back in 1992, and then back to 1995 when the corporation was incorporated provincially, and then seeing the leadership over that 30-year period and what they were able to do, and realizing, okay, well, it's time to carry that hat for the next the next, decade or two, and bring it to the next level, with the changes in climate, the changes in the economy, the changes in regards to energy. This is going to impact First Nations in Ontario, and we can see those impacts. So basically, that's how I got here.
So that background in governance and Indigenous leadership shaped your approach to infrastructure and community development. So is that a good statement to say?
I would say, and like, I was also like, my father's a politician, so those are the discussions I heard growing up. It was always discussed at the kitchen table. So I'm pretty well versed in political affairs, not just provincially, but also federally.
So access to clean water is a human right. In your view, what are the root causes of ongoing water insecurity in many First Nations communities across this country?
So I'm glad that you made that statement, because I believe that was part of Prime Minister Carney's platform speech when he was running. And, the Liberals won the election. And also having that discussion. So because the last government is no longer there, Bill C-61 is squashed, but not in the terms of it's no longer there. They're going to be drafting a new bill. And it is everyone's right. And when you look at clean drinking water, there's not just the legislative part of it, there's also the spiritual part of it, but there's the scientific part of it. So there's three elements that you have to look at when you're looking at clean drinking water and the rights of it. And there is a country, and I can't remember off the top of my head, in South America that actually gave rights to the water, where the water has rights and that they have legal, like the water has legal rights. And I thought that was very, I'm going to say very progressive, because
Yes.
it's also taking care of those ecosystems, and it's taking care of like the animals and the people in that country that, do not have a voice for themselves. But the complexities of it, there's also a lot of people behind the scenes that are working to ensure that there's clean drinking water. We have the politicians, we have the bureaucracies that also ensure or try to ensure that there's proper funding coming in. And then you have organizations like Ontario First Nations Technical Services Corporation, where we not only provide hub services for 21 communities, but we also deliver the circuit rider training program for 133 First Nations, where we offer continuing education units so that operators can maintain their licenses to ensure that proper and clean drinking water is delivered to their communities.
So you broke that down. So how do you overcome the political challenges?
Well, that's not it. The political part isn't so much for myself to overcome. What we can do, and we continue to do as a technical services corporation, we provide the analysis. So for example, when Bill C-61 was first presented, we did a complete critical analysis on the entire proposed legislation. And it was a very tight time period. So we had to work extra hard to do that analysis. But then it was extended, and the minister put out legislation again. And we provided our responses, and I believe we provided like a 10-page response on each component of the proposed legislation. And we also sent that to the Ontario Regional Chief at the Chiefs of Ontario, because we can provide them with that critical analysis from a technical standpoint, but we're not there to sit at the table and to negotiate, or, to say, well, this is what you should do, because we're not that elected leadership to do that, or we're not that hereditary or traditional leadership. Like I don't hold that role, but I can provide them with the information that they need to take that forward. So from that standpoint, anytime something that comes down from government, whether it be provincial or federal, and, it's with our realm of expertise at OFNTSC, we take that back and then we provide the information and send it back to leadership.
So for sure. So maybe you could talk about some of the barriers that Indigenous communities face when trying to implementate.
So when I look at some of the barriers, well, number one is having an operator, a trained operator or a qualified operator. So number one is your human resources. Uh, Next is ensure that they maintain those licenses, that they have access to training. Also, when it comes down to supply chain and equipment that has to go, to repair the water treatment plant, to manage that asset so that when things need to be replaced, the expertise that you're going to need. How long is a part going to take to come in to replace that? Also, access to the community, meaning budget. So if it's a remote and you have to fly in, what's the cost of that? And, are they receiving the proper operations and maintenance dollars to maintain that system? I know that those operation and maintenance dollars went up a few years ago, but is still that enough to maintain that system? Some of the other barriers it could also include like leadership with, when you look at the elected chief and council. I know now that there's a course out there that explains, the complexities of water and wastewater systems so that they have a clear understanding of their responsibility and their liability in terms of the community having clean drinking water. But it's sharing that knowledge. Being a former council member of my community, I had no idea until I took this role what that meant and, what the staff in that water treatment plant were responsible for. So I would say that those are a few barriers, but also getting people interested in understanding that, water is a career. We at OFNTSC, we do have this program, which is called the Technical Youth Careers Opportunities Project. The acronym is TICOP. And we try to get students in the door, whether they're in public school, high school, post-secondary. We do a lot of outreach and STEM summits because we focus on STEM to get young people interested in these types of careers, because if they don't see it, they don't know that it's there. Youth tend to look at what they see around them as a potential career opportunity, and they don't necessarily see, hey, there's a job in water operation, and oh wow, I can make more than a school teacher, being a water operator, and take care of an entire community. And part of the work that we put out there and the brochures that we put out there, it demonstrates that career path and the potential for earnings in that career path. So I think the huge barrier is your human resources and getting people in the door, because right now, when you go through Gen X and what youth are interested in today and just the different mentality, that's also a challenge and a huge barrier. But I would say that the largest barrier comes down to the lack of legislation, or I'm going to say the consultation and co-development of the legislation, because there seems to be a document created, but yet it's presented to you to look at, but that co-development piece is still missing. I think government may think that co-development means you read it after and make changes rather than actually sitting there at the drawing table with government to do that. So I think that's the first barrier that needs to be overcome, but also applying the necessary budgets that it's going to take to ensure everyone has clean drinking water. Because if, in the platform that Prime Minister Carney stated that it's a human right, well, then all First Nations should have clean drinking water. And it's not just necessarily the fact, when you look at a barrier, some of the barriers where OFNTSC has advocated for First Nations, it comes down to a simple generator. The hydro goes off, the you know, the water plant doesn't have a backup generator. So immediately the community has to go on a boil water advisory, which is, I feel it's unnecessary, you know, provide the proper funding so they can get a generator. Then it'll avoid a BWA. So like, it's things like that, like components, even when you look at, you know, one of the failures, and I'm not sure what this new legislation is going to look like, but it does have to mention source water protection. What does that source water protection look like? Because each nation, some might be pulling their water from a reservoir, an underground reservoir, some might be from wells, some could be from lakes. How are we protecting that source water? And, you know, and when you look at overlap between federal and provincial, you know, laws, you know, like they tend to not apply to a First Nation when you look at, you know, their treaty rights and traditional territories. And it's just a matter of somebody exercising those rights and the community understanding what their rights are to that. So I think those are the first barriers that have to be overcome.
Yeah, you certainly hit on some key points. I guess one that really resonated with me was about the, you know, the quote co-development, and you know, in project management, immediately I think of you know, one of the key components of project management is good stakeholder management and involving all the stakeholders, particularly the users, in the discussions of what needs to be done. So it sounds to me like a typical government, they're off living in their ivory towers, developing legislation without consulting the actual people that are going to be using the product of the legislation. The, you know, in newer approaches in project management, in the agile approach, the stakeholders are involved in the actual process of developing the scope of the project. But it sounds to me like they're not following any of those standard project delivery practices in the development of legislation. They, you know, and that's a fatal flaw, and that's why project management has moved in this direction of taking an agile approach where the stakeholders are involved continuously. That's the key word, continuously, in the development of the scope of the project. So that certainly resonated with me. And also when you commented about source water protection, I mean, really, you know, the water system that the communities have is at the end of the process. Because if you're not protecting the source water, well, you know, the source water would be at the front end of the system. The water treatment plant would be at the back end of the system. So, you know, you're dealing with the risk of contamination at the back end of the when you have least amount of wiggle room. Whereas if you dealt with the problem, you know, early in the game at the source, then you wouldn't have so many problems trying to deal with it at the back end in the actual mechanical system that's preventing any contaminants from reaching human consumption. So for sure, you know, that's basically where environmental project management solutions got its start back in 2005. We were working on the source water protection project across Ontario. And so it's kind of almost full circle around. So on that note, in your opinion, Melanie, how do you see project management as a mechanism for facilitating that core value delivery system, which I'm speaking of, that water plant, that wastewater system, that water plant is a core valued system in the community's infrastructure. And what role do you see project management playing in that?
So I'm gonna have to go back to, you mentioned stakeholders, going back to co-development, and you know, because when you get down to project management, you're looking at, the more operational components of the water treatment plant and how a project is managed, whether it's from, starting to develop a proposal with the community to get funding to build this water treatment plant versus the operations and maintenance of it over time, or also the financial component of it. But I'm going to go back to when you talked about stakeholders and people involved, because I think this is a component that should be discussed and it's not talked about enough. When you look at the United Nations Declaration Act, and Canada adopted this, and 2 years later, the Justice Minister released the action plan. And there's specific actions that, the federal government is responsible for and to respond to. And the crazy thing about it is, after that, the action plan was released, there wasn't a budget attached to it. But it's really clear, and I think this is up for interpretation, uh, because even when I go back to Section 535 of the Canadian Constitution, and in Section 25, which explicitly states that it's up to how Indigenous people interpret that. Article 18 of the United Nations Declaration Act, it says that Indigenous people have the right to participate in decision-making matters, which would affect their rights through representation chosen by themselves with their own procedures, as well as to maintain and develop their own Indigenous decision-making institutions. So when I look at project management and how you move forward, I would take that back to each individual community, because they might have their own developed way that they manage things within their community, because each community is at a different progression level of what they determine as their own progress for project management. So some might take like a communal approach where everybody's involved in decision making, or some might just leave it up to the band to take care of that. So I would say you have to leave that with each community. Where Ontario First Nations Tech Services comes in, we take an approach where it's very I'm going to say procedural, where we the systems that we do go in and offer hub services for, we have a schedule of where the water operators are being sent to. We also have work orders, so we can keep track of what type of work's done on each system, so that we know that where the system's at, how to manage it, if pumps have to be replaced, chemicals, and then we could also inform the community what they have to order, because as a technical services organization, we don't receive their funding. The community receives that on their own. So it's up to us, though, just to provide the information as to what they need. It's not up for us to purchase that equipment, because the money doesn't come to us for that, just to operate the system.
Yeah, you pointed that out a couple of times, that it's all well and great to have this water system, but the O&M is if the wheels fall off the bus, if the O&M dollars aren't there to support it. A perfect example of that was working out in Little Shuswap, and the reference was made that we're putting in this X dollar plant, and as far as the public works guy was concerned, a couple of lagoons would have dealt with the waste problem at a tenth of the cost. So he was implying was that a lot of times they're over engineered. And he said, where are we going to, this is going to be a class 3 operation. And he says, the filters for that are like $75,000 a piece. He says, we're supposed to keep 2 or 3 of those in inventory. Like, that's a lot of money. And, where's that money going to come from after the plant is built?
Yep. So I think that comes down to, I guess, operations and maintenance of that plant. Like, I don't work directly in taking care of plants. I don't totally understand the science about it. Like, I lead the organization, but we have experts that work for tech services that provide that knowledge, and I trust in them 150% that they know what they're doing, and I trust that the information that they're giving me is accurate and up to date, and hence why we use this work order system. But that also comes back to, when you look at communities and you look at community development, and depending on, when I look at, how do you decolonize that approach to governance, especially when it comes to water? Has the community even really looked at that? Or are they just depending on an outside source to do that? And that's fine. Like OFNTSC, that's our job to do that for the unaffiliated communities. But I'm not sure exactly what stage each community's at in terms of their management. Or have they all received management, project management? Do they know how to manage their systems? And I'm certain that when water operators take, when they're working in their own, a lot of them work in their own communities, they stay there. They're there for life. They don't leave. It's a fulfilling position, to work for your community like that. But I think one of the other challenges, and you talked about barriers, but I know when the O&M dollars, when Indigenous Services Canada increased that a few years ago, it was to put water operators on par with what municipalities pay their water operators. But as each First Nation has the autonomy to deliver funding as they see fit, which comes into their community, we don't have any say over what their pay scales look like. All I know is, like, as an organization with OFNTSC, we do a salary study every 3 to 5 years, and we also compare it against the province. So we got to make sure that we're competitive also.
Yeah, for sure. Otherwise, you're going to train all these folks and then they're going to leave.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Leave.
it's going to be a never-ending story.
Yeah.
But that's a good point about, that how many of the community members see operating the water system as a career choice.
Oh, agreed.
Yeah. That's a really good point, because that would if folks in the community saw that was a valuable service. I mean, water is life. And, if you've got the job of supplying water to the community, well, that would be a very high profile position in my perspective.
And honestly, I know my profile. I've updated it since I sent that to you, but I no longer sit on the board for the Ontario Clean Water Agency. I resigned in April. Just I have too much going on. But
Yeah, I saw that.
yeah, but yeah, I don't sit on that board of Reconciliation Canada anymore. Just due to my time. But with the Ontario Clean Water Agency, I know walking in the doors back in 2013, and that gave me quite a run over 11 years sitting at that table. I didn't have the knowledge back then that I do today about water systems, about wastewater systems, how they operate, um, you know, uh, what it costs to operate them, and just looking at the responsibility of an organization like that. And then I took it back and I thought, okay, Ontario First Nations Technical Services Corporation, would it be possible for us to operate systems if communities wanted us to do that in Ontario? Very possible. And I know it's within our core mandate that we do this and offer these services to the unaffiliated First Nations. But then probably about my third year serving as executive director, the the task had been placed by a resolution through the chiefs and assembly that we develop a business plan for a water authority, is what the resolution stated. So we put that together and gave it back to the chiefs of Ontario, because I believe the leadership at that time understood that, you know, legislation was potentially coming. And what would that look like in terms of responsibility of First Nations in regards to water? So there's another aspect of work that's been done in the background to ensure that the mechanisms are in place, because when it comes down to project management in a community, there are these rules to the law that are going to have to be followed within that legislation. And when it comes to jurisdiction, like, it's going to be, I believe, from a treaty jurisdiction and a traditional territory jurisdiction, not just federal legislation that's going to be imposed upon First Nations, but rather than First Nations coming forward, well, maybe they want to enhance that, you know, to meet their needs in terms of their traditional viewpoints, depending on which nation that they're from.
I think it'd be a great idea. I know the Atlantic region, they have a water authority. I don't exactly know what they do, but I remember seeing that that it was a First Nations water agency for First Nations out in the Atlantic region. So that'd be certainly worth something taking a look at, and looking at that model. And, you know, I think back to, you know, early days of young Trudeau saying that, you know, when he split up, I guess it was INAC into ISK, and, you know, he was talking about, yeah, I keep losing track of all these acronyms. The CIRNAC, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And, you know, he talked about, you know, dismantling ISK and, you know, giving First Nations the capability, you know, saying we want out of this business. And you know, but I didn't, I thought, well, yeah, good luck with that, because you got a big bureaucracy that's not exactly going to sell themselves out of a job. So that, you know, let First Nations take care of their own systems. So that's where a water authority, a First Nations water authority for Ontario would make sense. Just give them the money and say, there.
Yeah, and you know, like when I look at Indigenous Services Canada and the people that I've worked there in regards to our water file, um, there's some really strong support there for devolution and for handing that over. Uh, like, I have discussions with some representatives from Indigenous Services Canada on a regular basis, and they're very supportive of that approach. That's something a lot of them want, but again, they only can take direction from, you know,
Yeah.
the people that are telling them where they need to be. So in the meantime, it's working within those parameters to make sure that we can at least have some tools and the financing to be able to deliver. So it's kind of like a fine line you have to walk, and uh, just to make sure that, you know, communities are getting what they need, and trying to advocate. And again, going back to the information that we provide to leadership, it comes down to, well, we can't speak on your behalf, but here's the information for you to take forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I kind of saw the analogy when I was out at the Micmacs, and, you know, they say, you know, we go out and the fisheries officers show up and, you know, start throwing fines at us and threatening to throw us in jail. And you say, well, because we're here to manage the fish. And the comment is, well, you're not doing a very good job. You've had 150 years to do this job. And why, you know, there's no fish. It doesn't sound like you're doing a very good management job. You should probably be fired. Any good boss would have fired you a long time ago. So I'm just saying, you know, how long have these boil water advisories been going on when you start looking at, you know, maybe somebody needs to be fired, but that's my opinion.
And I can't comment on that, but
I know you can't. I know you can't comment on that, Melanie.
I noticed,
I've got
Greg,
a foreign to say what I have to say.
there was there's some questions in the chat here, and one of them is from a George Hoff, but honestly, I can't answer that question when he asks about usage of modern technology to filter out solids and heavy metals out of source water and wastewater. Like I don't.
Yeah, that's way too technical for.
that's I'm not the person to ask for that. Like you would have to ask the director or you know, our hub manager a question like that, because I'm not I'm not in a
Where's Drew
plant.
when you need him?
Or Glenn
Or Glenn, yeah.
or Adam McHugh, he could answer those
Yeah,
questions.
yeah. But I think,
Melanie, if you'd like, we can pose that question to the team and then share the answer back to George later on, once we get a question from the team from your side. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
okay, well, I see Nadine jumping in, so that I'm thinking that's my cue that I better shut up. So
If you've got more questions and you want to continue on with this conversation, we have a few questions in the audience as well. But maybe if there is something that you'd like to um, maybe Melanie possibly talk to us about project management with ENVPMS and the relationship there, a little bit, just so that other people can see how OFNTS or Ontario First Nations looks at creating a charter for project management to help other communities.
Well, we have in the past, because we're funded through Indigenous Services Canada through our core, we've had to apply for other dollars to deliver project management to First Nations that are interested across the province of Ontario. So we applied for the dollars, and you know, through our financial policies, we do have a competitive process, and Greg was our successful proponent, and we engaged with Greg, and we've delivered some project management courses throughout the province. And we also had some of our staff go through the project management, and it was very successful. I had some great feedback from some of my team members and colleagues that attended. So that's all I can really say about that. I wanted to attend myself. And it just came down to time, but I'm hoping that we can do more project management sessions, because I think it's very critical, and it just doesn't apply to water. It could apply to any community project, or even managing the community from a leadership standpoint. It's beneficial, and it could work in any part of even your personal life.
absolutely. Thanks for that endorsement.
Okay, perfect. Well, Melanie, thank you very much. We have a few slides that I would like us to go through, and then we'll open the floor to questions. I would like to encourage everyone to prep some questions, come up on screen, unmute yourselves, and ask Melanie or Greg directly. So if I will just share my screen here. And I just wanted to quickly introduce you to this webinar series. This is a series this is the third of our series. It is specifically on project management for Indigenous communities. And every 6 weeks on Tuesday at 1 p.m., we take a topic and we discuss like what we just did today with Melanie and wastewater. And we look at how this affects the communities. How can you put certain structures and project management in place to help you? So this is a calendar of what's coming up next. Our next session is on the 24th of June, where we're going to be talking about sustainable housing. And part of what we've done, and we also heard Melanie say this earlier, is some of the challenges are either stakeholder management or possibly even human resources. So we would like to hear from you, and I ask you to just quickly get your phones out and scan and let us know what your biggest challenges are in managing projects, because that helps us and helps Greg and the team to cater to those needs and the topics that we have coming up. So I'll just give it a few seconds. For those who cannot scan, my colleague has shared the link, and you can just click on that link and answer just a few questions.
Yeah, I think we've got our speaker for our housing event,
Yes.
Sarah Chigano.
Yes.
She's with
So-
Chip of Nawash coming up.
Yes, our next event
There
is
she is.
on the 24th. And we've got Sarah speaking about housing. We would love to have you join. We'd love to have you share the event with others in your community and your network that you find this interesting to join us. Just again, scan, and register for the event. Okay, so maybe what I'm going to do now, I'll just keep this out here for a second. And then we have Wahida from ENVPMS taking over, and she will open the floor to questions and share some questions with Melanie as well and Greg. But before doing that, again, I encourage you all, don't be shy, come up on screen, share your questions, ask, unmute, and let's have a conversation going. So I will hand it over to Wahida. All right. Here you go, Wahida.
Hi, everyone. I'm Wahida from Environmental Project Management Solutions. Miigwech Melanie for being here today and being such a keeper of the waters and merging the traditional ways with the more technical ways of water management. We thank you for showing up here today, and everyone else that has taken their time to show up here today. So please, if anyone has any questions, I would invite you to raise your hand or unmute yourselves to ask Melanie or Greg a question. So Melanie, I have someone that would like to speak to you directly after the fact. What is the best way to get a hold of you?
I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay.
And just to set up a time or to email me whatever type of query they have, and if I can answer it. Oh, sorry, there was. And I think that would be the best way.
Perfect. And Patricia would like a pay scale that you develop for the First Nations water operators. Do you have something available?
I have an internal document, and I would have to, because we paid for that from our own coffers here at OFNTSC. And we hired a national firm to go in and do the comparative analysis across Canada, and then also compare it to the United States. So they gave us, clearly what people make, and we had to spend a little bit of money on that.
Okay, perfect.
I would have to ask, because it's like, again, it's like an internal document that we paid for, and yeah, I'm not sure at this time.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Melanie. John Peters is raising his hand. John, I'll ask you to unmute yourself. Come on visually if you'd like.
Am I here? Can you guys hear me?
We can, thank you.
Sorry, I can't see my own face, so I appreciate it. I apologize. I'm still getting used to this because it feels like I'm on Muppet Show, but I just want to say that I appreciate your words, Melanie. They ring so true, especially across Canada here and being First Nations. So my challenge is, as an urban First Nations, because I reside here in Coquitlam First Nations, and part of my ancestral home is the Tri-Cities. So our challenge was that it took us forever to acquire a service agreement to provide an essential service like water to my community. So part of Coquitlam's challenge is that we have to deal with so many entities within our territory. A good example, because I know you're from BC, but part of the challenge is BC Hydro, Metro Vancouver, and then also have to deal with the municipalities. So we were trying to think of a way to create our own water system, so we're not relying on all these people that have a say in how to provide that service to our nation. So, and that's what's frustrating me, because where the watershed is my ancestral home. It's displaced us for over 150 years, like Greg said, and we are slowly trying to get access up there because we know the importance of it, and we're also looking for an opportunity because the name Coquitlam means red fish of the river. So we're trying to create that personhood for our own river to protect it from being ever damaged again. But the challenge with that, and just providing those services to the people, is these navigating the waters with not just the municipalities, but these other forms of government like BC Hydro, Metro Vancouver, and also a part of that challenge that we're trying to be a part of the water usage plan is that they have this outdated lease on our ancestral home for 999 years. Reading a document, it's very outdated, very racist, and I can go on for days about that, but that's part of our challenges. And so with Coquitlam, we want to be put ourselves in a position, but the challenge is or to provide our own people with the water that the Creator had given us, but the challenge of that is just capacity and human resources. So I was just curious if you had any ideas, because we're limited for space for one, and also the human resources and the capacity to sustain such a water system, because for Coquitlam, although we're urban, we had many challenges historically, and so we're trying to work with not the municipalities and the federal government, because essentially right from 150 years ago, they never really protected the Coquitlam Nation, and we had to deal with flooding and such. And so that's always been a challenge to, even as First Nations, and we do get water with one of our IR2s, it's limited because the challenges of these people essentially getting in the way for us, and we just don't have the capacity to provide it and be self-sustaining as we always have. So I just wanted to throw that out there, and I'm curious if you have a better way to navigate the municipalities and those forms of government, because it can be challenging. And that's a thing too, is that a lot of people don't understand that they use this essential services, water, just for the rest of the Tri-Cities and Vancouver just to flourish to what they are today. But and that's the other challenge, is that because they're not taking care of their wastewater system, every time we have an atmospheric river event, because we're at the mouth of the Coquitlam, it essentially affects us everything downriver. So talking about shareholders and everyone up above us on our I'll say our nation's river, but it can be challenging. So I just wanted to throw it out there. I don't know if it's a question, but just looking for an easy way to navigate those areas, because it can be challenging for us as leadership, and it can put us in a confrontational position, especially because me and my peer council understand where we come from and how much the water it's supported our nation for thousands of years, but it's just educating these people on the outside the importance of just working with us in a better way. That's so to say. So I just wanted to put that on the table, I guess.
I would go back. So you're part of the Stalo Nation, right?
No, Coquitlam, we're separate from Stalo.
Okay, I wasn't sure. And you have a land base, correct?
Yes, the two IRs, yeah. And we're right in the basically in the middle of the Tri-Cities. I don't know if you know Vancouver too very well, but we're right underneath the Portman Bridge.
Okay,
Main
yeah,
bridge
okay,
there, yeah.
yeah, I know where that is. Although I lived in the interior, I lived in Sequakpak territory when I lived there. Um, I like it. So which did you sign a modern treaty? Because I'm just trying to figure out like
No, we're not in treaty, and that's the part of the challenge as well, is that we've never been in treaty, being a sovereign nation since we've been colonized. But and that was the thing too, is that with the whole treaty process, because we only have 130 members, they didn't really let us be a part of that. So we just started doing things on our own here, and that's why I said we're in a position where we would like to acquire our own water system, but the challenge with that is just acquiring the capacity, the human resources just to run it on our own. Because out of the few members that we have, I personally started my journey as a water waste operator because I knew my community needed it. And also being a or an urban's First Nations, I just wanted to acquire the skills to help the people from the Stalo upriver because they're more remote. Some of them being on boil water advisories for a while, and I just wanted to help other First Nations until I got on council, and then I had to retrain another one. And I heard that earlier, the challenges of getting the young ones to understand how important it is to be a steward of the water. It's not a glamour job, especially wastewater. So getting the young guys in there, they don't see the importance of it as being a career than just a job. That because everyone needs water and wastewater for the rest of their lives. And so we're trying to convince the young ones, but they're just not. The challenge with that is like social media and all these easy ways to make money over than really doing some meaningful work. So sorry, I apologize. I could chat for days about this issue.
Well, my email's there, John, and you can send me an email if you want to set up a chat with me or a call. But I think that all comes down to like the negotiation with the Tri-Cities, since because the reason why I asked about treaty is because I'm like, okay, which organization would you go to? First Nations Leadership Council, or would you go to Union of BC Indian Chiefs? And so I would use the political pull with the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and I believe that's Don. Oh, I can't even remember his last
Yes,
name.
I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Don Tom.
Yes, Don Tom. Yeah, yeah.
That's who I would reach out to through with your chief, and write a letter and just say, okay, this is where we're sitting at. This is the kind of supports we need, and we need your help negotiating this. And I know, he's a very well, highly respected leader, and he could step up for you.
No, I totally appreciate it. And I never even thought about reaching out to UBCIC. It's just something that me and my peer council are trying to work on our own because, like I said, we're just limited for time. And so I appreciate that advice and especially your words today. So thank you.
And going back to asking you for Stalo, just because Chief Tyrone McNeil, he's a good friend of mine, and I do
Oh,
a lot
he's
of work.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he is just a wealth of knowledge, that man. Yeah.
Okay, no, I appreciate that too. So I'll reach out to both of them and then see what I could do. But like I said, just that the part of the challenges with dealing with some of the stakeholders that are essentially because they have a new water line coming into my ancestral home, and it's taken 80% of the flow of the Coquitlam River, and we're not just concerned about drinking water, but how that affects us here downriver, especially at the mouth of the Coquitlam, and that water just doesn't push out the sediment. And that's my concern for the future is potential flooding, potential issues of it infiltrating our water wastewater system. So and so I appreciate your words today. So
Thanks, John.
thank you.
So Shannon and George are asking similar questions. Are there funds available to support infrastructure development for the design phase and construction phase?
We, like, as a technical services organization, we apply for the unaffiliated communities that we work with, the Direct 21. Our engineers apply for the infrastructure development and design phase dollars for the communities that we work with. So there are funds available, but we have our engineering team working on that to make sure that the projects get funded.
Thank you. So Melanie, are there 3 key takeaways that you'd like to share with us? Sum everything up.
think I mentioned them at the beginning, but I think number one would be going back to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The new bill on drinking water legislation that's going to be proposed. And number three would be project management on how that's going to be managed once all of those legislative and decisions are made on how funding and the work's going to flow back to community.
I got to give you a star for that one, Melanie. There's your
My
star.
first star today.
First star today.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn it back to Greg, and Melanie has shared her email in the chat. So feel free to reach out to Melanie or her team. We'll get back to you with more technical names from Melanie directly. If anyone has any more technical questions, they can be addressed to her team directly. And with that, thank you, Miigwech, Melanie, once again, and I'm going to turn you over to Greg.
Okay, so thanks to all our attendees and the team for putting this all together. Special thanks to Melanie for taking the time today. You know, time is your most valuable commodity. And thank you, Melanie, for taking some of your time to share your knowledge with our attendees. The team will be sharing these top takeaways post-event to keep, so keep an eye out for that. Quickly, I'd like to introduce that we've got this transformative project management mastery program that we're now offering that takes you through an entire journey of project management. So it takes you from basic courses right through to advanced courses to PMP certification to setting up project management offices. This does not happen overnight. This would be like a 2 or 3 year program. So we'll send some information out on that. So again, this is all about taking you through the journey of project management. And it's all culturally grounded. So feel free to download and get in touch with our team to see how you can take the first steps in getting your projects up and running. You can scan the barcode. I'd love to hear from you. Here's my coordinates. I look forward to seeing you all in our next webinar. That's coming up on June 24th with housing. And thank you once again and enjoy the rest of your day. And thanks again and see you soon, Melanie.
Have a good day.